Yesterday I spoke to a mum who lives in London. She's got a 4-year-old daughter who had a very high temperature yesterday morning. She phoned 111 and was told to get a test. She tried to book and was told the nearest was Romford. That was 9 o'clock in the morning. She explored that, but there were no tests there. She was then told Haywards Heath, halfway to Brighton. On exploration, no tests there. By lunchtime, this mum was told the nearest place was Telford or Inverness. A slot became available in Lee Valley in the afternoon, one slot, but unfortunately that was being offered across the country, including to people in Manchester, and it was impossible to book. 9 o'clock last night, she was told the nearest centre was Swansea. This is frankly ridiculous. Who does the Prime Minister think is responsible for this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, clearly I take responsibility, as I have done throughout, for the entire handling of the coronavirus crisis. But I would just say to those who attack NHS test and trace and those who deprecate the efforts of the people who are doing their level best to keep us safe, Mr. Speaker, that it is precisely because of the success of test and trace that capacity has gone up to from 2,000 a month in March to 320,000 a day. And we know, thanks to NHS test and trace, in granular detail, in a way that we didn't earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, about what is happening with this pandemic. We know the groups that are suffering, the extent of the infection rates, and we've been able, thanks to NHS test and trace, to do the local lockdowns that have been working. We also know that, alas, some people have not been following the guidance in the way that they should, and therefore we are seeing a rise in infections. And that's why today we are taking decisive steps, Mr. Speaker, to intensify our social distancing measures, the rule of 6 that will be familiar to the country, in order that we can keep our economy going, that we can keep our schools open and keep this virus under control. And I hope that he will support those measures and indeed, Mr. Speaker, support NHS test and trace.
Keir Star.
Mr. Speaker, I'll hear the measures later on, but we will, in principle, support them, as I've supported all the measures the Prime Minister has introduced, as he well knows it's the right thing to do, and I've asked people to follow government advice on every opportunity. Mr. Speaker, nobody's attacking here. The Prime Minister needs to know how anxious hundreds of families are. In the last few weeks, they've been sent all over the country or told there are no tests. It can't be brushed off. On the 21st of this year, the Health Secretary said anybody who needs a test can get a test. It's the most important thing that you can do to stop the spread of this virus. This is a very serious issue. And the government line on this seems to be changing all the time. Yesterday, the Director of NHS Test and Trace said, "Can I offer my apologies to anyone who can't get a test? It's a laboratory processing problem." This morning, the Health Secretary changed tack and appeared to blame the public. I note that he made a statement yesterday and faced questions and didn't say anything about the excuse that he puts forward this morning that emerged overnight. So who's right? The Director of Test and Trace, this is a laboratory problem, or the Health Secretary, it's the public's fault?
Mr. Speaker, I of course sympathise with all those who are facing difficulties getting tests as fast as they want, but demand is at an unprecedented high, particularly because demand for asymptomatic patients. But he should know that this country has done more tests, 17.6 million, than any other country in Europe. That is thanks to the, and he likes these international comparisons, Mr. Speaker, that is thanks to the efforts of NHS test and trace. They are, in my view, doing an absolutely heroic job in spite of the difficulties that they face. They've massively raised their output and testing, and they will be up to testing 500,000 tests a day by the end of October. This is an organisation that is working heroically to contain the spread of this disease, and it requires the public to trust this organisation and to participate, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the right honourable gentleman said it was on the verge of collapse. I think those were ill-chosen words. I think he now regrets those words. I think he should reflect and he should take them back.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, hundreds of families are trying to get a test in the last week and they can't get one. I do acknowledge the number of tests overall, but this is basic stuff. People who've got COVID symptoms are very anxious about themselves, their children, their families, and what to do. It means they can't go to work, they can't send their children to school. It matters. And if they can't get tests, the Prime Minister needs to take responsibility. And not just about the future or something else, but address this problem. And I want to take it further, because it's not just that people are being told to go hundreds of miles. Somebody contacted me yesterday and said this: my wife has a temperature, and they said we needed to isolate and get a test done. I've been trying to book a test. This is yesterday, Prime Minister. And the site says no capacity. Then I tried for a home test kit, and they're telling me that there are no kits available at present. This is the state today, yesterday. Yesterday there were no tests available in London, the same the day before. Prime Minister, what is happening?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I note that he won't take back his criticism and his attack on NHS test and trace. I know that I regret that. I gave him the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to withdraw his verdict, that it was on the verge of collapse. It is not. They're doing a heroic job. They're testing hundreds of thousands of people. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we will do more. And the world we want to move to as fast as possible is a world in which everybody can take enabling tests at the beginning of the day, an antigen test to identify whether or not we have the virus or not, like a pregnancy test, within 15 minutes or so that we know whether we're able to live our lives as normally as possible. That's the vision that the Health Secretary and others have been sketching out over the last few days. That's where we intend to get to. In the meantime, NHS Test and Trace is doing a heroic job, and today I can tell him that most people get an in-person test result within 24 hours, and the median journey is actually under 10 miles if you have to take a journey to get one.
Mr. Speaker, we all want test, trace and isolate to succeed, and I've offered my support before, but the Prime Minister is ignoring a problem. If people are being told to go hundreds of miles, something is wrong. It's got a lot worse in the last week or two. Everybody in this House knows it because they've all had constituents telling them it. And the Prime Minister talks about capacity. The latest government figures were updated last night. They show that on average, 75,000 tests are not being used every day. If there's 75,000 that are not being used, why yesterday were people being told to go hundreds of miles for a test? Why yesterday were people being told there's no capacity?
Mr. Speaker, the issue at the moment is that there has been a massive increase in the number of people who need or want tests, and particularly people who don't have symptoms. And we need, and I hope he agrees, we need to prioritise people such as NHS frontline staff, our care workers, who urgently need those tests. And as we massively increase the number of tests, it is those groups who are getting priority. And I can just tell him that actually he's wrong in what he says about the failure of NHS test and trace. Let me tell him that of those contacts that supply details, 80% are reached, and 320,000 people have been persuaded to self-isolate and to stop the spread of the disease. That is the British people ignoring his attempt to undermine confidence in test and trace, ignoring his attempt to undermine confidence, and working together to get this disease defeated.
Keir Star.
Mr. Speaker, I'm listening carefully to what the Prime Minister says. What's undermining confidence is families being told to go hundreds of miles and they can't get a test. That's undermining confidence. I just want it fixed. We don't need to have an argument. What's the problem? Accept there's a problem, tell us what the solution is, and we'll all muck in and try to make it better and tell our constituents. I've been listening. Is he saying there are too many people coming forward for tests? It's a capacity problem or not? People are trying to do the right thing. They want to go back to work. We want children back in schools. The Prime Minister is encouraging that, quite right too. We understand that. We support that. The government side of the bargain was to deliver an effective test, trace and isolate scheme. But 2 weeks into September, there's a glaring hole. Can the Prime Minister tell us, when did he first know about this particular problem of having to go hundreds of miles, or that tests were not going to be available? It's last week it's arisen. When did he first know that that was a problem?
Mr. Speaker, it's obviously a function of the growing demand and the growing public confidence in NHS test and trace that we have to supply more and more tests, and that's what we've been doing. I think, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether he's been listening, I've been trying to give the House the figures. Actually, thanks to the heroic efforts of NHS test and trace, we've gone up from 2,000 tests a day in March to 320,000 a day today. And it is thanks to the efforts of those thousands of people who are listening keenly to his words for some support or some encouragement or some belief in what they're trying to do. It is thanks to them that people, on average, have to travel less than 10 miles, and it is thanks to them that 80% of the contacts that they identify, a coronavirus patient identifies, are reached and told to self-isolate. That's what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker. It's hard work. It's hard work. It's a big job. And they're doing a fantastic job. And I really think what they would like to hear is some praise and encouragement and support from the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Keir Star.
Mr. Speaker, why can't we just hear from the Prime Minister an honest answer? If he stood at dispatch box and said, "I know something's gone wrong in the last couple of weeks. We've been getting hundreds of examples of people being sent all over the place or being told there's no test. I've looked into it. I've worked out what the problem is. Here's my plan." People might be reassured. But as ever, he pretends the problem isn't there. The infection rate is rising. This is the very point we need a functioning testing regime. But far from the world-beating system we were promised, the government can't even get the basics right. The government is lurching from crisis to crisis. It still lacks even basic incompetence. This is what's holding... It lacks competence. Yes, Prime Minister, it lacks competence. This is what's holding Britain back. So my final question is this. When is this problem with test, trace and isolate going to be fixed?
Mr. Speaker, I think he was on the money when he said that this government lacked incompetence. And if I can just say to him that we are working flat out to address all the issues confronting us today, including trying to get the infection rate down. And we are getting on, Mr. Speaker, with taking the tough decisions, making the tough calls that will take this country forward. When it came to saying schools were safe, he was silent because he didn't want to offend his union bosses. And when left-wing anarchists, Mr. Speaker, tried to destroy the freedom of the press, he was silent because for some reason he didn't want to offend crusty left-wing anarchists. And when it comes, by the way, to sticking up for our UK internal market, Mr. Speaker, and for delivering on the will of the British people, one of the most important issues facing us today, he is totally silent on this bill that obsesses the rest of his backbenchers. He's totally silent. Great ox, once again, has stood on his tongue. He has nothing at all to say about that subject today because he doesn't want to offend the huge number of his backbenchers who want to overturn the verdict of the people and take us back into the EU, which is, of course, what he wants to do himself. This government gets on and takes the tough decisions on behalf of the British people, delivering thousands of jobs through our Kickstart scheme, a record-breaking investment in affordable housing, £12 billion affordable housing programme, and getting on with all our work, working with the British people and working with the Right Honourable Gentleman, if he would only do so, to get coronavirus defeated and to take our country forward. We take the tough calls. All he does is sit on the sidelines and carp.